Welcome back. Episode 11 of the World Through Zen Eyes podcast. I'm MyongAhn Sunim here with
Dr. Ruben Lambert.
And we are back for another fan mail. I'm going to stop saying fan mail.
No, it's just great that people are really listening, participating, and contemplating things and giving us some feedback. So, again, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate that.
Absolutely, we do. It does make this something other than just the two of us having a chit chat.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like we're talking with. Hopefully it doesn't feel to you like we're talking at, but we're talking with the listeners, especially when these questions come in or these suggestions. And in this case, questions, suggestions, but also a bit of a perspective already built into the question. So anyway, this is what's on the table. Thank you for the gift of this podcast. I'd like to suggest happiness as a topic. In general, I think many people have high expectations about being happy. For example, in the context of the U.S., the Declaration of Independence refers to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as inalienable rights. However, by expecting or demanding happiness to be our default state of being, we can unintentionally increase our own suffering. What can we learn from Zen principles about developing a healthier perception of happiness? Does the alleviation of suffering mean happiness, or something more like neutrality? Can we still pursue our own happiness and that of others without being attached to or clinging to the idea of happiness? It's a mouthful. It asks questions, but also answers questions from the Zen perspective as well. So the listener clearly has an understanding of Zen, at least its larger principles, and happiness and things of that nature. So, as per usual, I think it always calls to the need to define terms. If you have not listened to the very first of our podcast episodes, which ended up sort of being a general disclaimer, perhaps, for the podcast in general, words on words. And we talked about words and meaning of words and how words have been either weaponized or kind of defanged. And anyway, throughout the podcast, we've weaved this idea of words having a meaning that's assigned to them by, say, the Websters. But they also have a meaning assigned to us by an individual, right? And it's which definition are we working with? I mean, we mustn't forget that the Tower of Babel is a real thing. We are in it. Not in the fact that necessarily you speak Spanish, I speak, Polish, let's say, and this and that, but in the sense that we could speak the same language and yet just can't get an idea across because, and this could get, we can't do it in the day-to-day conversations, I think, because the conversations would get very technical and this and that. But when it comes to discussing a point, I think it's a good idea to get some bearing as to what in fact it is that we're discussing. And arguments, interpersonal, sort of ideological, political, religious, whatever, are frequently hinged on the fact that it appears that the two parties are talking about the same thing. But when you listen a little bit closely, you realize that they're talking about their individual definition of the word and the concept of the word, and they're arguing up on it as if they're talking about the same thing, which they're not.
Mm-hmm.
So the arguments made for or against an idea from one perspective, or a person who's working with a different definition than the other person, it's what are we talking about? What are we arguing about?
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some ground rules in a sense of what it is that we're talking about. And so
I think things like, for example, you mentioned, definitions, right? There's a general definition for any term. Let's say one thing that I was thinking about was temperature. And you could look up definitions of, let's say, hot and cold, right? And then you have the individual experience of those things.
mm-hmm.
And it could be completely, I see this with, like, my parents, for example, when it comes to just
Who's
hot
hot?
and cold.
Who's hot? I'm hot. Who's
You
cold?
know,
What do you mean you're hot? I'm cold.
My
good
mother's
idea.
always cold, my dad is always hot. So when they ask each other that question, they're using the words and the terms
Right.
to describe their experience, but the person
Very
is
true.
perceiving it from a completely different
perfect.
angle. Yeah,
That's
it
perfect.
really, really is. Like, my mom could ask my dad, "Oh, is it going to be hot out there?" And my dad's like, "Oh yeah, it's hot." And then my mother goes outside. She says it's freezing
Yeah.
outside. You're like, "Okay, what world?
Bring a jacket.
What world of the two are you
Yeah.
living in?" It's just, but they're using the words hot and cold.
Yeah,
Yet-
that's perfectly.
Yeah,
That's perfectly
yet-
put.
Yeah,
Yeah.
two people they're just.
Yeah. So
the
let's
nuances kind of-
let's kind of unpack a little bit
Yeah.
the idea or the word happiness or the definition with which we're I think the biggest or the first maybe place to start is happiness versus pleasure,
yes,
right?
that's
because
a good
because
distinction, right?
happiness is frequently thought of as pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not always the case, not by everybody. All right, everybody, put down your keyboards. Don't clickety clackety just yet. Not me. All right, let me put it this way. Sometimes people, when they speak of happiness, it's synonymous with a state of pleasure. Something pleasurable is going on, etc., etc. So we have to consider that element. Also, we have to consider the nuance and the scale of the word. And happiness could be sort of span the spectrum of contentment, satisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Happiness, excitement, elation, and mania, and ecstasy.
Sure.
Right, so it could be that whole spectrum if your definition is wherever it lands. So, I guess the whole thing will depend on what personal definition of happiness is going to be. The listener pens it against: does the alleviation of suffering mean happiness? And we could say yes, right? The absence or the alleviation of suffering is a happiness. But then consider sadism and masochism, and kind of, right? So again, this thing. Well,
I think the sadism and masochistic ideas also fall in line with what you were referring to just right before that, where you have almost like this range of happiness, and then if you cross a line or you go into an extreme, then you have some terms that even in clinical psychology we actually don't consider as adaptive or functional for daily life, which is states of ecstasy and states of euphoria, which are closely tied to the term that you use there, mania, which if you look at the definition of a manic episode, you can see that a lot of the things that a person does in that state of mind doesn't lead to a happy life when they wake up out of that manic state. But in that moment, they're feeling
elated.
that. They're feeling that
They're
elated
happy.
feeling. Yeah.
They're uber happy. Yeah.
There's no sense of control there. There's no sense of limit, right? So, yes, they're happy, but then there's this endless pursuit of pleasure, soul pleasure. And then I think back to, remember Remember when we went to go see the Buddha play in New York, the one man show?
Ah, yes.
That was
Yes,
really
yes.
nice. And one of the things that he said there is like he was playing the role of the Buddha, and I think Mara comes and says to the Buddha, who was Siddhartha Gautama at the time, he tells him to stop his pursuit of enlightenment, and he says, I believe something like that, I will grant you one mountain full of gold or something. And then in the play, the gentleman playing Siddhartha Gautama responds and says, no, I would not want that, because I know the human mind. After you give me one mountain full of gold,
I want to.
after some time, yeah.
Yeah, if the rain were thrown to gold, even then our greed will not be satiated. So yes, an element or control is always a thing. So we could tie that to wisdom.
Sure.
Happy, how happy is happy enough? And because one could be happy, and if your happiness is dependent or built on the backs and necks of others, is it happiness? It's happiness for that person.
Right.
It's their own personal happiness and somebody else's personal
At the
hell.
cost of what, right? Then right there, when you describe it like that, then I just think Ebenezer Scrooge type of happiness, right?
Right. Until he gets...
happy. I'm happy, but taking away from somebody else, does that bring me happiness?
Right.
So that means their dissatisfaction, their pain is my pleasure?
Yeah, and of course, Grapes of Wrath, a must. Tom is having a conversation with someone, and the person goes, well, you just got to make a living. And Tom says, yeah, I wish one could make a living without taking it away from another. And so this idea of happiness, from the Zen perspective or psychological perspective too, you mentioned mania and this kind of extreme. It's a hostage situation in a sense. It's a blackmail situation. The happiness is dependent on unhappiness for its very existence, and vice versa. It's this yin-yang, the yang element, that we cannot have one without the other. You cannot enjoy a meal if you don't know hunger, and you're this goes with thirst and any form of joy and happiness. And they are codependent in that sense. So the very pure approach is to want one thing without understanding that the other, its shadow,
Yes,
is this is the sort of building blocks towards one's suffering.
ultimately, yes.
It's going to build you out of your happiness if you're expecting happiness and happiness only, and also forget the fact that happiness, like I said, is the other side of the coin of suffering. And so this happiness is a slippery fella.
I think that's a very good point. Understanding it with the yin-yang perspective, keeping that in mind. Where there's night, there's day. Where there's day, there's night. Where there's light, there's shadow.
Right.
And it's a very good. There's a very good point that you make there. It's human beings want half the equation only,
Right.
and just by wanting half the equation, right there alone, you're already causing so much suffering, right? Because as the Buddha says, all things are impermanent. That includes happiness too.
Yeah.
And one makes the other, right? So the absence of sadness makes happiness, but then the absence of happiness makes sadness. And if you, let's say, just look at those individual parts and you become attached to that. So you, let's say, are eating your favorite slice of pizza and you're very happy. What happens after that last bite?
You're full.
But automatically now you're left wanting more. And it's in that wanting more and that craving more that you might feel disappointed. Right? But so that automatically came.
What is enough?
How do you find that state of being full enough and understanding that, yes, this happy moment surely will now come to an end.
Right.
And that's okay. What do you do with that?
One hill, there's one of the big players in Korean Zen has a list of these things, and one of these little short statements, he makes a statement akin to contentment is the highest, either riches or satisfaction, something to that
Mm-hmm.
effect. And contentment, right? Because now we have the satisfaction. You have the thing you wanted. You got the thing that you wanted. How do you hold on to the contentment with it? And contentment could be, across the board, right? But so this last element of the question from the listener, can we still pursue our own happiness and that of others without being attached to or clinging to the idea of happiness? This is a very important point that we can absolutely pursue, and we ought to. And in fact, yes, we can, so long as it's not this rigor mortis attachment. I mean, the Four Noble Truths clearly pin these things, the building blocks of existence and happiness, and this satisfaction, or the unhappiness and the suffering, if you want to call it that. We see it there, and that the fundamental prerequisite for suffering is attachment and clinging, right? So again, we could go so many ways with this, because the nuance then would suggest that there's nothing wrong with happiness. There's nothing wrong with suffering. There's nothing wrong with anything. No. There's nothing wrong or nothing right. It's the attachment and the not knowing what is enough and where is enough. Mm-hmm. That is a problematic situation here.
Humans don't know how to balance the scales, so we're constantly chasing. When you're working hard, sometimes your mind becomes exhausted, and naturally what comes next is what? You complain. I just can't wait for the weekend. And we've talked about this, right? You work for the weekends.
Yeah. Hump day and all of that.
Yeah. So then you work really hard, you suffer in your mind working, and then the weekend comes, you're happy. But then Sunday nights, the misery starts again in anticipation of Monday. And if you continue down this endless cycle, it's this emotional roller coaster that by the time you're 50 years old, your heart will be ground down to a pulp.
Well, we've invented for your further carrots to the donkey, a thing called retirement.
Oh yes,
right.
So many people suffer in retirement.
So many people suffer the retirement and the pursuit of retirement. When I retire, I can't wait to retire. When I retire, if you haven't it organized and you retire, it's a premature death. I've seen people retire, and within 3 years,
there you go.
The cognitive and physiological deterioration is so severe, right? That it's a death. It's a death sentence. I know people who have retired and within 6 months went and got some menial job somewhere just to stay active, and so retirement is. What do you do with it, firstly? But also to live the entirety of the life for the retirement, and God forbid you drop dead 10 minutes before it.
Right, and then how many years do you retire for?
Mini retirements. Yeah. You drive and derive joy and fulfillment from your momentary things and the small little things, and it is, I think, more fulfilling than this kind of promised land, which you may not see, because that's the reality of it.
And what a sad life. You work 60 years to look forward to your retirement, and then
you're old, you're sleepy, you're grumpy, you're tired, frequently.
And then you suffer then, so that means your whole life you suffered.
Right. Yeah.
That's why I think some sort of a resolution is, yes, happiness and sadness does exist. They're almost like siblings, right? One makes the other. From one, the other one is born, and they're impermanent, right? You will cycle through that. There's nothing wrong with experiencing happiness, but know that your happiness shall pass. The same way that your pain and suffering shall pass too, right? And then we get into this great human contradiction that, again, we've spoken about many times, is when happiness comes, human beings, we love loopholes, right?
Mm.
When the happiness comes, you want it to never end. But when the bad stuff comes, you're like, make it go away
Yeah,
right
make
away,
it go
right?
away,
So it's
yeah.
like, pick one. Is it either one or the other?
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I think One Heal solution there is almost like the Yeomju, which no one has one on right now, but it's like the string with the beads on it, right? The changing moments in life, but you have the string. The contentment can almost be the string. Then I think that'll grant you a better way of living your daily life. Yes, you're going to have to, there'll be times when you'll work and you'll suffer, and the dissolvement of that will come and you'll experience happiness. But then that happiness too, those things are conditional. That can fade also. But then what, you plunge right into like depression and darkness and my life is over? No, but see, if you have that string of contentment throughout,
Right.
then that can, I
Satisfaction.
think that can provide you a formula where you can live your life with more meaning. But yeah,
Contentment is very close to. We're getting there. We're working
Right.
towards it. Actually,
Yeah.
The experience in life is going to be what life presents. And what life presents is this yang, this happiness
Yes.
and unhappiness,
Mm-hmm.
the pain and pleasure, the
Mhm.
suffering and the absence of suffering. And this is the state of reality, right? And so understanding it as such, this idea of happiness, in a sense, is to a certain degree delusional. And what the listener is suggesting is that exactly that these by expecting
Expecting.
or demanding happiness to be our default state of being, we can unintentionally increase our own suffering, and it's absolutely the case. But it's the expectation that makes it. It's not the fault of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fault of the expectation of happiness.
Right.
So what is enough? How much is enough? We have to understand. And yes, absolutely, it is not the default state of being. Happiness is not the default state of being. War is closer to the default state of being,
unfortunately.
right? But having said that, understanding that it is not the default state of being, also then must bring with it the idea that no one in this world, or the world itself, or the existence itself, I mean, if we want to get into Diamond Sutra, Asang, Insang, Chungsang Sang, Suja Sang, these things, that not the other person's or your frankly, even your family's, no thing outside of yourself is required or saddled with the responsibility of your individual happiness. So the expectation of someone else,
yes,
as being the one who furnishes happiness,
for you,
who makes me happy, right, is unfair.
highly.
It's unfair, and it's not real, right? So this idea of expectation of life, and it's, as the listener puts it, the default state of being, it is not. Happiness is not the default state of being. The expectations cannot be put on the world, people in it, to furnish me with happiness. It's unfair to burden someone in that way.
I kept thinking burden when you described
Relationships do it, familyship, and we have all those things, but we're talking kind of
the extreme to be the
bones.
sole source of my happiness.
Right.
You put an
So
unfair
you could
burden.
have a family, you
Sure.
could have a loved one, you
and
could
they
have
can
all
make
those
you
things.
happy.
You could have them and be miserable.
No, that happens all the time. I would be out of business if that wasn't the case.
So what responsibility lies with the individual? This is something that must be understood. It is my personal responsibility. Not only is it the responsibility, but the reality of the fact, it is the only way to be happy. It is the only way to be happy is to make yourself happy. You could bring in people to participate in this, but with every degree of participation and involvement you surrender to another person, remembering that that person is a person and a human and not perfect. With every degree of that, what we get is the degree of control that they are given. And therefore, the greater the degree to which a person can make you happy equates to the greater the degree to the person can you make you miserable or hurt you. We are more hurt, and we are hurt more so by those who are closest to us, who we let into our hearts, right?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing. So, yes, do not expect the world around you to make you happy. You can make out of it happiness, and only you can do it, right? And other people could participate, etc. But at the bare bone minimum, that's the thing. Now, having said that, we also have to consider that happiness is an emotion, and so
Right.
It's just one of life's experiences. I tell this to parents frequently, in terms of protecting children from emotional experiences. Well, I'm not talking about traumas and things that are kind of visited upon them, but the simple experience of life, being and having to be. Really, this kind of broad plethora of human experience, from moments of sadness to, God forbid, boredom. Boredom is the new devil, right?
No one knows what to do with their boredom nowadays.
It is worse than pain. It is worse than suffering. I mean, we
don't even want a kid to spend like 2 seconds in boredom. Heaven forbid. We bombard them.
Well, because this is the
blinking
thing.
lights.
They can't.
Right?
They don't know what to do with it.
Things, yeah.
Because we don't provide tools and equipments so as much as we sort of used to. This isn't to say that old ways were like, go outside and play, and if you break a leg, walk it off. That's not what we're suggesting.
No,
that's not the way. But the point is, it's and I'm still searching, and perhaps there's this listener out there who could come up and help me, because I have yet to come up with a better image for this than the old computers. You remember defragmenting your computer, where you had to defrag your computer,
and you had this more space,
to get more space,
I remember
right?
that
and you had
clearly.
this, you had this grid, right?
Yeah.
And you had these little bars and lines of different files and stuff. And when you defrag, you compress all of that stuff into one side. So you squeeze out the useless empty spaces, and that space then is transferred to a broader empty space, in a sense. So now you make more room, more space. I can't come up with the imagery of modern day that is akin to that, because it was perfectly exemplifies the need for boredom as a means to expand the mind. Like if your computer hasn't enough memory and you want to open a program, it takes so much energy and so much space for the program to initially just open. And then it collapses and it no longer uses so much energy. But the opening needs space. And if we haven't that, how then is the mind going to kind of open up? But anyway, that's another thing. What I did want to bring up is this idea of emotions, and we could kind of dive back into the principles of Oriental medicine, right? Happiness or joy is, we're talking about it as the highly coveted emotion to have. But from whether it's the 5 element principles of Oriental medicine or the Sasang Korean medicine system, right? Emotions, and we've talked about this briefly, when uncontrolled, and here's that word again, right? What do you do with it? How much is enough? What is sufficient, etc., etc. Emotions, when uncontrolled, and I've mentioned that famous, but quote by Ijema, who said that if you let your emotions run rampantly, they damage your 5 viscera, means your lungs, your heart, and it takes when the damage is done, it could take 10 years for you to fix it. He really kind of drives that. He said it's the same thing as stabbing yourself in those organs with a knife. And so this idea of emotions as experiences, but an extreme end of it, right? So with children, as I said, this idea of like a multivitamin, emotional multivitamin, right? And boredom is just one kind of vitamin. You need it, right? Sadness too is a needed emotional experience, because they will go out into the big wide world and they will experience sadness and et cetera, loss, right? And so this idea of emotions as a necessary experience is one thing, but this idea of them being uncontrolled and within the sasang principles of Oriental, or the Korean principle of sasang medicine, we have four makeups of the body in a sense. And out of these four, two, the Soum and Taum, work with, initially there's this thing called the nature. The person has a certain nature, and then the nature expresses itself in its kind of opposite ways. So you have, calmness and joy, and they play these kind of games within one person. And too much of one or the other, right? So too much calmness, right, which on its extreme end is laziness and kind of inactivity, and too much joy and on the other end is we said like elation and then mania, hysteria, those kind of things. So this idea of these emotions running amok, that's the English word, running amok, can damage your physical health. So happiness, right? And then we see the same thing in the 5 element principles, whether of Oriental medicine or the philosophy, right? Happiness, too much happiness is damaging to the heart, right? Too much happiness is damaging to the internal organs, right? So too much happiness is what we may seem we want, right? But if you get enough of it, or not enough, if you get too much of it, then like anything else, too much of anything, too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing.
Right.
So if we look at it from this experience of emotional state and things I'm happy with and unhappy, and if we pair that with absolving the world around us of the responsibility to furnish this upon me, then we have some, control panel that we could work in within oneself. Which thing do I surrender the power to, if I choose to, make me happy? From which thing do I withdraw the power for it to make me happy? Right? And happy you could substitute any emotion for it, right? And so this just simple idea that an emotion arises, and then we are there, just kind of at the mercy of it, it's not the healthy way to look at it.
It's not.
We want to have the kind of multivitamin, the nice bouquet of emotional experience in life. It makes things interesting. If it's just roses and roses and roses and roses, and then if it becomes roses, and then it becomes them roses, and then goddamn roses, and then roses, right? And then you get jaded, and then roses are no longer roses. They are now, murderous demon thing you try to get rid of out of your mind. So it lies between this idea and we even have within Oriental medicine, by means of diagnosis, right, the sound of a person's voice, right? So we have a thing called the laughing voice, for example, and the laughing voice is an expression of the fire, and it's damaging to the heart, etc., etc. So by means of diagnosis, you're listening to the sound of the voice of the person, and there's an emotional element to it, and that emotion then suggests an excess. And this is again the thing: what is excess? What is too much? What is not enough? And so we have to remember that we have this ability. Now, I do have to absolutely bring in the idea of the fact that We use the word happiness interchangeably and frequently within Zen tradition also. Why? Because the word peace is boring. Contentment is boring. Peace is boring. Satisfaction is boring. Right? It's this theater.
Well,
this
the
kind of
assumption is
seesaw.
because there's no change.
Right. So
There's
it's
no
the
growth
seesaw
or no
game.
development
Yeah.
in that
Mm-hmm.
when
Yeah.
people use that term.
It's stagnation. It's viewed
Yeah,
as stagnation, and boredom. And we know boredom is the new devil.
I don't want to go
And
there.
yeah, so but it's the seesaw thing, right? And if we consider that the absence of suffering equates to joy, right? Or the absence of joy or happiness equates to suffering, then like I said, it's a hostage situation. It's a seesaw thing.
Yeah.
And they're fizzy. I like to say that they're fizzy. So you have your happiness is fizzing, but it's fizzing upwards. And your suffering is fizzing, but it's fizzing downwards. So there's a fizz, there's an activity, there's a happening, there's an evolution, there's a living thing that is assigned to, there's movement and life to happiness, and to suffering too.
Sure.
Right. And so when we consider the idea of calmness or tranquility, of peace, or what the Korean term that we frequently use, koyo, which simply means kind of stillness, it's unappealing to the general mind.
But I think maybe to give a practical metaphor, I like the concept of the seesaw. Right. So if you look at the seesaw is plastered into solid ground, right? And then so you have the ups and downs, which can represent the day-to-day changes in the emotions, but you always come down onto solid ground. And maybe this can be the contentment or the satisfaction, and within you always come back to solid ground, and from there you're going to have the changes, the emotional states that come and go, the things that you have to work towards, the things that you have that you lose. But if you have this common ground throughout that you return back to, that is a state of peace, a state of contentment, then I think when the ups and downs happen, you'll be able to tolerate and endure them with a more clear mind, you'll come out of that with your heart intact.
Yeah, it is.
It's not, I think it's sometimes people, we want to create this vacuum with these terms.
Right.
Oh yeah, koyo, it's, just complete peace and silence. Well, that sounds boring.
Right.
What do we do? And so I think when you launch from there, when that becomes your launch pad, and again, the actual term, what it really is, this is just a practical metaphor that people could apply for their day-to-day living, right? Because some people, you have the ups and downs in life and they're entangled in that. But then when that stuff ceases, they don't return back to solid ground. No. Theirs is a deep, dark cave that they plunge into. Or they plunge into murky waters, and then they feel like they're drowning and they cannot swim and stay afloat.
Yeah, I like the imagery of the sky.
Yeah,
here,
the sky. Sure.
And contentment and peace and that koyo, without getting too deep into it, the nature of our true self, if you will. There's a self that is unchanging. And again, when we say unchanging, our conscious mind goes, man, that sounds boring. Man, that's just, what do you do? It's just not unchanging. But if we inspect one's own life's experience, I think most people will find somewhere in their life experience a moment where things were just right.
Right.
And it wasn't on the account of happiness. There's a happiness, if you want to call it that arises from that contentment, peace, and that stillness. Happiness is for the birds. Happiness in this idea of some, wow, it's a nice thing, but it's trash, really, when we consider the bliss, if you want to, layer that in that way, the bliss of peace.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not boredom. It is not some kind of death, because this is the thing. We view it through the lens of our sensory perception in the grossest of ways. And then we say, so this idea of the sky, the vastness, the prodigious vastness of it, and it's clear sky we're talking about. And then clouds of various shapes and birds and such and such and such. All there, experienced, seen, there they are, but not, for the lack of a better word, soiling the firmament itself. And perhaps even better still is this idea of a projector screen and a thing being projected onto the screen. And if it's, you project a scene of a fire, or you project a scene of a flood, the scene of a flood is flood, the scene of the fire is fire, but the screen itself is neither burnt nor made wet.
Yeah.
And so that is the actually thing we're after within the Zen principles, right? We sometimes call it happiness because, like I said, we avoid then this having to define the terms every single time. And people like it, so we say, pursuit of happiness or the absence of suffering and things like that. So to go back to the way that, let's see, this question was, does the alleviation of suffering mean happiness or something more like neutrality? This is where I'm kind of driving at. Neutrality can view, neutrality can be seen as this kind of boredom and then why you live. What's there, there's no kind of woohoo or boohoo going on in your life. And neutrality seems boring, right? And so the Zen pursuit of peace is what we're after. On the firmament of it, there will be happiness and there will be unhappiness, etc., etc. And those are experiences, valued, informative, as we said from last episode. But they are also not the entirety of the sky, the entirety of the prodigious vastness of the firmament of self. And when they are viewed that way, then the smallest of sufferings become sort of insurmountable, and then we collapse under the weight of it. And happiness then becomes the only sole thing that one pursues. And when that's the case, then one will pursue happiness no matter what the cost, your own, your body, your mind, your spirit, or other people. And so, yes, it is what we are after within the Zen principles is, we could say, I'm just going to say koyo. I like Korean terminologies because they are not well known, and I could kind of preserve their integrity in a way that I
They're
mean
not
the
tainted
word.
at soul
I mean
by
the word, right?
Other people's
ideas. And it's not that I mean it that way. That's what it is. But so this idea, I now comes to mind this brief line from somewhere, that if paradise was my prison, I shall still want to leap that crystal wall.
Yes. If paradise was my prison, yes.
And so we could say if happiness was my prison, right, I shall still. So
you're not free.
We could build absolutely out of the bricks of the pursuit and the manic, or the attached and fixed and fixations on pursuit of happiness is absolutely a remedy for disaster.
And I think Zen always offers us this resolution. With many of the things that we talk about balance, right? And we talk about not getting lost, being aware of what you're experiencing, and you stay in a state of control where you experience that doesn't become a wave that consumes you, and now it's like a parasite that's now, pushing the buttons inside of your brain and steering you in directions that you don't want to go in. Because it's very easy to understand how happiness can become very quickly reckless.
Yeah.
I just want to give you the metaphor of teenagers living in a home where their parents decide to go on vacation and they leave them there, and the teenagers have a pool party. And then all of a sudden they're so super excited, and they invite all of their friends, and they engage in underage drinking and reckless behavior. And they're so happy and free until somebody decides to jump off the roof because they're happy and free and excited. And then now people are getting hurt. So it's always, what is the cost? That's the wisdom that needs to be always taken into account. And you can also look at many cases of movie stars that have gained all this wealth and fame, and then they experience this emptiness. And then they go and take the things that they think are happy, and then they engage in this endless, nonstop pursuit of pleasure. And you can very quickly see that all of their fortune, whether it be reputation fortune, financial fortune, and what we see right up front is that their health is just washed down the drain because they didn't take into account what is the cost, right? So some people are happy and they think, let me drink now. And let me drink for endless hours, endless amounts, or let me engage in endless amounts of sex with endless amounts of people, or drugs. And I'm so happy because I have the money and the resources to do that. But when the storm leaves and the dust settles, what was the cost of it? And oftentimes, then the harsh reality sets in is you lost many things that were valuable to you in that process. So wisdom always needs to be taken into account, balance, and an awareness as to, well, what is the healthy use of this emotion, and when is it becoming something that is a obstacle or a hindrance in my life?
Yeah, it is. I think a good kind of way to summarize this whole thing here. Yeah, let's go through this. So, no, happiness is not the default state of being. Defining the terms is a great way to start, or a great place to start. Know what that means to you. You've mentioned, people with sort of affluent and fame, and if you define the fame as your happiness, then that's your definition of it, right? Fame is granted, right? Your fans make you famous, in a sense. And when the fans stop making you famous and the fame goes away, have you any happiness then? And wealth, this being so, etc., etc. So to whom do you surrender this power over you? Unless the other party is conscious and conscientious participant in this communal happiness, right? Which is what hopefully people close to our hearts do for us. So knowing to where do we surrender the power to, like we said, and the degree to which a person can make you happy, or a thing can make you happy, is also the degree to which they can take that happiness and turn it into suffering. So no, life and its sheer default state is not responsible, nowhere does it suggest that it will furnish you with happiness.
Yeah, that
it's
really
your work.
Yeah, that makes me feel, when someone thinks that way, I feel as though someone has a sense of entitlement, so it can breed arrogance, or life is supposed to give me happiness. I also feel as though that can plunge a person into a state of laziness. Like, I don't have to do anything because, the inherent nature of life is just things are going to come to me and make me happy. Like,
or depressive states, or
when
somehow
life doesn't give you that, then there's something wrong with me, right? Life is supposed to be happy for everyone, right? So I don't have the things that make me happy. Something's wrong with me.
Yeah, so it could undermine your self-worth, right?
Yeah,
and this
so
is the thing. What is your self-worth? Your self-worth is this: how much are you worth? You're worth this understanding of the power that you have, which is in fact your godlike power. And we forget it, and we don't utilize it properly. And when you buy entirely and wholeheartedly, hook, sinker, and line, or whatever, however the saying goes, into let's say
Hook,
your
line, and sinker.
What is it?
Hook, line, and
Hook,
sinker.
line, and sinker. And if you buy to that degree to, let's say, advertising industry, you're done for.
Sure.
Because the amount of truth that is in advertising is dismal.
It's half the story.
Half?
Maybe
I wish
less.
it was half.
Maybe less. Yeah. Because
I'm going to venture a guess 90%
right?
of
Sure.
advertising thing is lie.
I've yet to find a Coke bottle that has glistening pearls, perfectly round, glistening pearls of sweat, just designed to make you
be
thirsty.
canceled by Coke. But so yeah, if you really subscribe to these fairy tale that advertising industry presents before us. If you buy this car, you will be like this. If you buy this thing, you're.
They purposely pair and make an
course,
association,
yes.
right?
Yes, this thing
To-
will make
to
you
speak to what
sexy.
you
That
want.
thing will make you lean. This thing will make
You
you
have these
smart.
shades on, and you get the girl, and
That's it, right?
someone's thinking, let me get these shades so I can get that.
I was
right?
behind a bus. This is years ago, and it had a woman's butt in a bikini, and a bottle of vodka, and I don't remember what the juxtaposition was, but that it was like that. So it's sort of say you either get, when you get this, you get that. I don't know what they were selling, the butts or the vodka. But they're suggesting us, they're synonymous.
It's actually the
If you
opposite,
get this,
right?
you get that.
You drink too much, you're gonna not have that butt, right? You're gonna be in the gym.
Well, that's the thing. It's
but they make you think
right
that,
that
sure.
that
This will
joke,
get you that.
yeah, that the beauty is in the eye of the beer holder.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole other thing, right?
And so, if you subscribe to that, the fact that what is advertised as the gift of happiness, then you've lost your own magic of making a thing into happiness. Kids in their early lives, at least, have it. Right?
Yeah.
They find a rock, and it's the best thing that happens in sliced bread. By the way, as a bread maker of sorts, sliced bread is not the best thing.
I like to see, yeah.
Anyway,
I like to see a nice solid loaf that looks hearty, right?
Yeah,
It's like that came out of the oven, right?
that's right.
Somebody's
so,
hand was touching that, right?
yeah, and so kids have it. They find a leaf, and they make that leaf into the holy grail. Museums having the leaf like this leaf. Right. And so they have the power to make contentment and satisfaction and joy, and to make the mundane into special and into beautiful. And we grow smarter. And the smarter we grow, the dumber we grow, in a sense. And then we think, oh, no, it must be complex. Right. And if my, phone doesn't have 78 cameras, then it's, satisfaction and happiness is not going to be found there, because I need all 17 cameras. And to hold on to that is to hold on to a real power, and not to surrender that is to hold on to self-worth and ability to overcome and do anything you could imagine. It is a godlike power, really is.
Well, it gives you freedom, right? Freedom to make a choice again, something we discussed in a prior.
Well,
Because
freedom.
if you're
Freedom is the topic. We ought to do freedom.
Yeah, we should. But I think to that state that you're talking about, if a person is filled with hunger for, and then that gets into Om Mani Padme Hum too, right? For something, I think somebody is desperate, then they can be very easily sold. Any kind of advertisement that comes your way, you're easily sold. You lose your ability to have wisdom to understand what's truly there.
What are you desperate for?
You get sold a story. Right. Well, people could be desperate for fame and money and things like that, because they think they're in this, reckless pursuit of those things, because they think once I get there, it's the promised land. All of my suffering will just wash away, and I will finally be happy.
Right.
And man, all you got to do is turn on the news because I'm just saying.
I think we talked about.
Yeah,
I think we talked about the in the patience episode.
yeah,
Patience with happiness, right?
yeah.
And that's also a thing to consider, right? And I believe I've conjured up this memory of a football team winning a game, and this was recently. I think you said it was Super Bowl, right?
Yes,
And
then
people took the
afterwards, they're
streets,
so
right? And
happy.
yeah, so
Just
happy,
destroyed
quote
the.
unquote. And
Yeah.
we saw this, at Rutgers years ago, right? There was, a couch on fire because the team won or something
Sure.
or other. So happiness, phew,
Or you see some actors, they make it big, they get money, and then they buy a Ferrari or a Porsche. There's actually one famous one from Fast and the Furious who passed, and that same thing that you thought was your happiness was
Mhm.
your downfall, and they died there.
Right.
Right? You could look at Charlie Sheen. He was a guy that was desired by many women, and then he engaged in reckless drugs and sex, and he now got a few years back diagnosed with HIV. So that the same thing that you thought was your pleasure or your happiness actually now became your downfall. So we need wisdom.
Yeah.
At all
So
times.
yes, pursue
Right.
pursue happiness. Know that definition of what that means to you, right?
Right.
Pursue it. Know to which degree you are pursuing it, to which end you are pursuing it,
Right. What is it costing you?
right? What is it costing you or someone else, right?
Or someone else. Absolutely.
We mustn't forget the karmic element. If your happiness is built, like we said, on the necks and heads and backs and the stepping stones of human beings and people and animals and things of that nature, and if you take that to the extreme, your happiness will end with this life, and the collection of the outcome, the karmic outcome of this happiness of yours, is going to come like a surprise that you have never seen coming because you were so, horse-flapped, fixated on the happiness as the and the only. This is, in violation of the just principles of existence. That one thing, like you said, night and day, etc., that happiness is there is always a price somewhere paid, right, by somebody. And so, let's see. I think, yes, manage your expectations about being happy. Define the terms.
Sure.
Pursue it to a healthy degree that gets you a nice sort of healthy perception of happiness. And then if you want to go with the Zen route, know that the pursuit of koyo, of stillness and peace, does not fly in the face of pursuit of happiness. It doesn't leave you some kind of emotionally castrated kind of cow. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to experience suffering.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of fairy tale thing of like, enlightenment, and then you're not what you nervous system just evaporates when you reach enlightenment, right?
No.
You don't. So it is a good topic.
Yes.
It paired with the nice healthy dose of wisdom and understanding of life and as it is, not as we would like it to be, and you're gonna be doing just fine, being happy. Be happy.
Absolutely. And search for happiness within your life. Not in a fairy tale, not in a movie, not in social media. Find it in your life.
Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. I'm MyongAhn Sunim.
I'm Dr. Ruben Lambert. If you like what we said today, subscribe and like, and pass it on to somebody else.